Let's go with a bang this time. Well, the good news is that we don't have to worry about bad games anymore. I'm never too sure which one I should talk about first from one year to the next, but now we've got the bad games out the way, it means we can focus on the best stuff that the video game industry has been pumping out in 2021. You know, there's an industry that needs some good news. What I keep coming back to with how to feel about celebrating the highlights of 2021 is that the games industry is full of creative people, some of whom have had outrageously good years, and regardless of any outside forces that are tainted in the experience, I should spend some time talking about how great video games can be when they're on top form. I mentioned last week when talking about the worst games of the year that I don't really enjoy complaining about bad games, and so by contrast, this week is kind of the best part of the job in my eyes. Bad games are often a bit repetitively bad, but the very best games can be wonderful for so many different reasons, and if it becomes your comfort game for the year, then even better. Failing that, I know a thing or two about being uncomfortable because I used to own a chunky leather wallet that made it look like my Brazilian butt lift had gone horribly wrong, but one day I saw the light and was saved by Ridge, who were kind enough to sponsor today's video with their incredibly sturdy wallets that are available in more than 30 colours and can hold up to 12 cards that you can now carry around in your front pocket with a bit of style. Plus, Ridge were also kind enough to send me their waterproof commuter backpack with a shock-resistant laptop holder, and their larger Weekender duffel bag, which both have an external USB port for on-the-go charging, and when the world stops being on fire, I'm going to be using these a lot. Ridge comes with a lifetime warranty, so you can buy one wallet for the rest of your life if you so wish, with a 45-day return window for a free refund if you're not such a fan. Get 10% off today with free worldwide shipping and returns by going to ridge.com/RabbidLuigi and using the code RabbidLuigi. It's time to move your wallet into the future. Alright then, once more, but with feeling. I'd like to remind all of you that this video isn't strictly objective. Like, if you want a list of the factual best 10 games of the year, that's what Metacritic is for, but my choices are restricted by what I played in 2021 and what I enjoyed playing. And I'll be honest with you, there were few games that I was as excited for coming into this year than new Pokemon Snap, which is definitely up there when it comes to surprise announcements when it was casually dropped at a Pokemon Presents in June 2020. It's been more than 20 years since the last one. I think most people had given up hope by now, and yet Bandai Namco swung in like absolute heroes and brought the world the sequel that no one could have expected. It's a really impressive update of the original's formula, which admittedly was starting to feel pretty dated all these decades later. It's an on-rail shooter, where the only gun is your camera, but new Pokemon Snap comes with vastly improved graphics, a ton of new features, and roughly 7 generations of new Pokemon to sprinkle all over these widely varied biomes and environments. It's such a natural fit because the mainstream games simply aren't designed to show off Pokemon in their natural environments, interacting with other species and changing their behaviour based on what you throw at them. I miss some of the sneaky secrets that made the original such a fun puzzle to solve, and I'd love to see this game supported even more with even more DLC, but this is a wonderful reminder of a chapter in Pokemon's history that will always have a place with every new generation. It's like the old game, but newer and mostly better. One of these every 5 years now, please. There's two distinct phases to my life, which I like to call BP5 and AP5. Before Persona 5 and after Persona 5. And I won't lie to you amigos, I'm having a lot more fun now that I've played Persona 5. Not my favourite game that came out that year because 2017 was ridiculously stacked for games, but it was still a life-changing experience that I still look back on with great fondness every time I get sponsored and need to whip out some of its incredible music. Persona 5 Strikers is a spin-off that involves a lot of components from Dynasty Warriors that immediately begins to feel like all those other spin-offs like Hyrule Warriors and Fire Emblem Warriors. But actually, no, because somehow Strikers is able to feel more like Persona 5 than anything Koei Tecmo have made recently, and it functions more like a fun little side story come sequel than anything too hacky-slashy. If you pretend that Persona 5 Royal doesn't exist, it works pretty perfectly. The power of a summer vacation side story. Those Warriors spin-off games are always capable of dipping back into the source material for a few ideas, but Strikers is pretty damn good at capturing the feel and look of Persona 5, even though it doesn't really have to in order to capture the feel of the hacky slashiness. The Muso games are always at risk of feeling repetitive and very samey when the formula is stretched across a full game, and especially when tied in with another IP from a different genre, but where Strikers has blended more aspects from Persona 5, the detours into turn-based action RPG combat helps to inject it with so much freshness that you don't really notice the mindless hordes of enemies so much. More importantly though, it's a fresh new adventure for characters that you'll likely know and love, and they're done so much justice here that it really does feel like a pseudo-sequel at times. The care taken here is evident, and I love what they've done. Can't wait to see what comes next with this franchise. I love Persona 5 so much that I always wanted a direct sequel of some kind, but knowing how this franchise works, where every new game introduces new characters and a new storyline, I was resigned to the fact that I'd done it all. But now we've got Persona 5 Strikers and Royal, let's not forget, introducing a new storyline for these characters, and it's kind of amazing that they've done this, and they could do so much more if they want. Persona 6 could be a very long time away. In the last year or so, I haven't been able to care long enough to buy an Xbox Series X. Nothing against the console, since Game Pass is still amazing, but there's not a lot of these around right now, somehow. So unfortunately I can't talk about Halo Infinite because I haven't played it yet. I can talk about some of the best PS5 exclusives that came out in 2021 though, since I was able to track one of those down and threw Returnal on it as soon as I could, because I heard great things, and this way, I didn't have to struggle through the Demon's Souls remake and realize how badly that game has aged. By comparison, Returnal will likely age a lot better since it's a roguelike with heavy sci-fi elements that plays off the idea of a time loop. So you're dying all these times because Returnal ain't no pushover, and they worked it into the story as the time loop doing all of its, looping. I actually need to take a moment to underline how difficult Returnal is, because all roguelikes worth their salt have a fun relationship with difficulty and feel the need to ramp up the challenges so that you feel the significance of procedural level generation, and yet a lot of other roguelikes are two-dimensional or at least isometric. Returnal is a third-person shooter that is able to cram so many enemies and hostile bullets onto the screen that becoming overwhelmed is just part of the experience. It never feels too cheap though, because you can upgrade your character to be pretty dang strong, and the controls are so tight that it doesn't take too long before you got a hang of things and can fight back with greater confidence in your abilities. It's really satisfying to play through, and once you're keyed up on how to play Returnal effectively, it really is something else ducking and weaving through three-dimensional bullet hell. I'm not sure this is quite the system seller yet, but it makes for one hell of a convincing argument. Don't let the grind get you down. It seems like every year there's at least one or two really amazing co-op games released, and they always seem to have different approaches. It's helpful if you're really into cooperative gaming where you need to rely on the other player to pull their weight, since there's now so many options out there that you can likely find a co-op game for virtually every genre. Failing that, or if you don't have the time to work through a beefy games backlog, Hazelight Studios offered an easy solution this year in the form of It Takes Two, a fun, whimsical platformer that you can play with a friend on the sofa or a rando over the internet as you try to repair a fractured marriage by leaping through and generally navigating a whole bunch of varied gameplay styles. It's a little more colourful than the devs' last game, but no less romantically charged than A Way Out was, just with less drug cartels. I'm always a little cautious of any game, co-op or otherwise, that isn't content with one or two gameplay styles and attempts to do it all in a way. But It Takes Two is so confident in the way it flits between being a platformer and then an RPG and then like a strategy game and then a fighting game for some reason that I just get swept up by all of it and I fall in love with the game they've made here. I don't know how much marriage is being fixed here, but I'm having fun. There's probably more creativity in It Takes Two than about 70% of the rest of the games released this year. Hazelight really committed to the almost mini-game feel of this game, where it's never happy to sit still and be one thing for long, and suddenly you're fighting a squirrel on the wings of an aeroplane like it's Street Fighter, and holy shit, what? It can be a lot sometimes, and having to learn new abilities every 20 minutes can occasionally feel exhausting, but everything is so fresh and exciting in It Takes Two that I really couldn't care less. It plays so cleanly and looks so gorgeous from start to finish, and you get the sense that the developers knew this and wanted to show off how wild things could get. It's like a Little Big Planet game in a way, but with a ton more effort put in, and at times, it feels like something that a bigger game studio would have killed for this year. Guessing what Hazelight do next is frankly impossible because They've kind of done it already. Should be a fun meeting in the future for those guys. Holy goddamn, is Monster Hunter having a really great time lately. The last few years have been so good that you'd have a hard time finding another franchise out there that has had such a brilliant run of games. It all started with Monster Hunter World rocking everyone's world in 2018 and Capcom capitalizing on its popularity with some tasty DLC in the form of Iceborne. Then along came Monster Hunter Rise this year, an exclusive for the Switch, at least until next year, that shows that Capcom haven't forgotten the handy little streak it had on Nintendo consoles with earlier games, and also a very encouraging sign for the Switch's ability to pull in timed exclusive from third-party developers. And especially after Monster Hunter hit the big time so recently. Plus, this way it helped to flesh out the Switch's library for 2021, which was looking a little light in places. We've got taking down giant monsters covered now, we're good here. It is interesting to see Capcom compromise somewhat with Rise in order to fit the game onto Switch hardware, since this game was more so based on world than anything they made on Nintendo hardware, but the compromises are so subtle that you don't really notice them, as positive an endorsement of the Switch as I can think of. Rise's hunts are a tad bit shorter than with other Monster Hunter games, and it's no stranger to the occasional dip in performance, but Rise is a lot more welcoming to newcomers, and the same can't be said with previous games. You know, I struggled to get into World for a long time, but Rise fits me like a glove, and I'm a little stunned how far Monster Hunter has come all these years, both in terms of sheer quality and the accessibility for new players. I've very rarely felt more willing to pump hours of my time into a game before. No idea how I've put videos out this year. Look, I'm not going to say that I'm happier having a PS5 than I ever would be having an Xbox Series X or S, but I am about to say that this was the year to pick that particular side of the argument. Maybe 2022 will be Xbox's year now that Halo Infinite is out and kicking ass, but let's not rush ahead, because now we've talked about Returnal, it's only right that we tackle the other big exclusive that came out this year. Except this one got a Game of the Year nomination in that big circle jerk ad campaign funded by sexual abusers that Jeff Keighley runs every year. I'm not saying that's the reason why I enjoyed Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart more than Returnal, but it is nice for a game to get validation from something that doesn't really matter. Though if I ever had to split hairs on this, it's good to have a backup. I'm not about to stand here and tell you that my awards ceremony is better than the Game Awards, but I am going to tell you that my show isn't negatively influenced by my sponsors to the point where I can't talk about Activision staining the games industry with their abusive behavior and it's been going on for many years now and no one's really called it out or stopped it, and it's made it very easy to not play or talk about their games ever again. But, you know, Ratchet & Clank was really cool this year, and Insomniac's last allegation was, what, 2020? So that's cool. I'm enjoying this Ratchet & Clank revival a lot more now that we're onto original games, and hey, the reimagining last time out was pretty great too, but you can feel the constraints being lifted and the creativity bursting out like one big messy sneeze. There was a lot of pressure on Rift Apart being this massive title that will convince onlookers to buy a PS5 just so they can experience all of this next-gen gameplay, but what I like the most about this game is that it doesn't get carried away with funny gimmicks that can only be done with better hardware, and just tries to be the best Ratchet & Clank game that it can be. No, it's not some massive leap ahead in quality, but it is a ton of fun to play through, and has so much character laced into every moment that it simply feels like a standard Ratchet & Clank game dialed up to 11, and with everything looking and sounding just that little bit better. Plus, they added a new character and worked her into the game without ignoring Ratchet. That's like wizardry or something. It still hasn't quite sunk in what a great position Resident Evil is in these days. Wind the clock back to 2012 and this franchise was having its endgame moment with previous protagonists coming together for an epic showdown, but Resident Evil 6 was a big dollop of horse spunk that didn't know what it was doing or how to handle its story on such a large scale. Then we got Resi 7, which brought everything back to horror and dimly lit hallways filled with creepy blobs and angry rednecks, a perfect reset point from which the next game can easily pivot to some wacky story in a European village full of werewolves and big, beautiful women. I was just thinking that that's what was missing from Resi 7. By no means do I think that Resident Evil 8 Village is scarier than the best moments from Resi 7, but I do think this game is Capcom feeling more comfortable with what Resident Evil is. Horror is a big factor of these games, and Resi 8 isn't afraid to ramp up the scary atmosphere and tension to unbearable levels, but I appreciate that we've also got more of the signature campiness that helps give rise to the giant woman that everyone loves. This franchise is inherently ridiculous to its core, taking a lot of inspiration from B-movie horror, and so having Lady Dimitrescu stalking you is equal parts terrifying and kind of ludicrous, and also an unnamed third thing. It's not the best game I played in 2021, or the scariest game I've played recently either, but it did feel like a return to form for the type of Resident Evil game that we should have had ages ago. We're firmly out of Resi 4 shadow now, and into the welcoming arms of first-person horror. I, for one, welcome our new giant women overlords. After some of the recent high-profile failures that came out of nowhere to ruin your day by being glitchy and terrible, it is refreshing to have a game come out that we've been looking forward to for quite a long time, and it's actually really good. You know, I'm hopelessly optimistic, so a lot of my most anticipated games didn't even come out this year, but one that did was Deathloop. And that game rocked my fucking socks off. The more I found out about Deathloop before it came out, the more it sounded like my perfect game. It's an FPS from the team behind Prey and the Dishonored games, which bodes well for stylish action that doesn't become too muddled with a first-person perspective, and the fact its main gimmick is a time loop tickles that part of my brain that is slightly too obsessed with Majora's Mask. In fact, it's got more of an Outer Wilds vibe, where you'll die over and over and have to reset the loop dozens of times, but every death will leave you better equipped to go further next time. Deathloop is a simple concept executed so well that it leaves me wondering why no one has done this before, or maybe they have, but they fucked it up at some point along the way and it took for Arcane Studios to whip everything into shape in just the right way to show us how to do it. And boy howdy do they know what they're doing! Those early trailers were a bit vague about what Deathloop was all about, even though there were fucking tons of them, but it's the same idea as Returnal, with the time loop being used to help gather information so you can eventually set up that perfect run, but specifically so that you can assassinate all 8 of your targets before midnight. What I love the most about Deathloop is how much freedom it gives you to work everything out, because while there is a loose structure behind the passage of time and where your targets are on this island, the challenge of finding the perfect path to taking them all out efficiently is up to your own choices and how closely you've studied each target's schedule. It's time management with a degree of puzzle solving, all draped on the rock-solid mechanics of an Arcane Studios game that has undergone plenty of workshopping with the Dishonored games. It's endlessly replayable and open to so many clever solutions that I never found myself getting bogged down by the size of the task. Yeah, sure, you'll need to reset more than a dozen times, but there's a lot to do, and all of it is useful to do. Never been happier to lose all my progress before. You can tell the vibe surrounding Nintendo is so much better than it was during the Wii U days. It's not solely down to the Switch being a more inviting piece of hardware for developers and consumers alike, which has driven up sales massively, but even the games being made for the system are more hopeful? Is that the right word? The one thing we never got on the Wii U was a new Metroid game, and even though the big headline of Metroid Prime 4 is still an indeterminable amount of time away, the quick turnaround with Metroid Dread going from being a shock announcement to releasing within 4 months, it blew my goddamn mind! This isn't even the Metroid that everyone was waiting for, and yet it's the first original 2D Metroid for ages, and also fucking outstanding? Wow, where was all this talent when Nintendo couldn't pay anyone to buy a Wii U? Metroid Dread is everything that I would have wanted modern 2D Metroid to be, and I say that knowing that we already had a mini revival when Metroid Samus Returns came out a few years ago on the 3DS. It was the perfect dress rehearsal for Mercury Steam to see what they could do with an existing Metroid game, and they did such a banging job that Nintendo's hands were basically forced to give them the reins to something original. Metroid Dread is an astounding achievement for the creepier, scarier side of this franchise, with the Emmy robots providing a terrifying challenge that only becomes more difficult as they improve their hardware, and you're forced to adapt to what the latest one can do to make your life harder. These areas are also the perfect showcase for Dread's improved movement options, which are now as good as they've ever been, and are capable of being used to do some incredible things if you fancy 100% in the game, or doing speedruns, or even just a casual bit of sequence breaking. Mercury Steam was so confident with the type of game they made here that it bled into making Samus this stoic badass that she hasn't been for a few years, and I'm gonna need more games where Samus finishes off aliens as casual as this. I'm gonna need this reflected in Smash Bros. Yesterday. I wouldn't say that 2021 has been the best year for gaming around, but the quality at the top has been incredibly consistent. Like, if I turn the top half of this list upside down, I wouldn't be too upset since there's been about 7 or 8 really good games of roughly the same quality. It'll be interesting to see which games get remembered more fondly than others from this year, and how we all feel about them 5 or 10 years down the road, but if the original Psychonauts is any indication of that game's lasting legacy, then the sequel shouldn't have any problems whatsoever. In a way, I can't really believe that Psychonauts 2 is real, since the first game was a cult classic that didn't sell well, and while you might think that a successful Kickstarter campaign that brought in loads of money would be exciting, I've seen this show before. I know where this goes next. But actually, no? Actually, it's incredible? Can't say I saw that coming. But then again, the signs were always there, because Psychonauts 1 was kind of amazing in its unique way, and the sequel is simply able to pick up where that game left off, and 16 years later, with 6 years of waiting around, Psychonauts 2 is so comfortable as a sequel that it's like meeting up with an old friend. I don't know how they did it, but the devs have been able to defy all expectations for sequels and Kickstarter projects and have created this stunningly creative experience that captures the bizarre energy of the first game while also having enough room for its own ideas. Like, this game had one shot that it was preparing for ages and had to hit this fucking tiny needle width mark and landed it perfectly, and I'm honestly blown away how well they've done here. It's like a game that would have come out in the mid-2000s, but with a degree of polish that the best games have nowadays, and I couldn't be happier. If you're not already, make sure you're paying Tim Schafer whatever he wants. The best part of Psychonauts 2 is hopefully the name Psychonauts won't be seen as a cult classic anymore that you have to explain to people who haven't heard of it before, because now the game is in the mainstream. It had a recent game, and it was incredible. You should pay some attention now! This is RabbidLuigi, and if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more in the future. And there's a video right here about the worst games of this year, which you should probably check out as well. I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Scott Riker, Sarah Mallion, and AJ887. Thank you for watching, and dreams really do come true if you wait for them.